Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Land Your Ground, the video podcast for landowners and dreamers. And today we're doing a deep dive with a special guest in studio. We're going to be focusing on habitat management and whitetail deer hunting and all things food plotting. And we're going to hear from our special guest about their personal land journey, talk land ownership, and what big things are to come. So I'm excited to introduce you to our special guest today, Mr. Wes Delks. Thanks for coming, Wes.
Excited to be here, Chase. It's certainly a privilege.
Well, I don't know about a privilege, but it is, the honor is all ours. We really appreciate you making the trip up. Where's home base for you? You're not a local boy, so how far do you have to come?
Yeah, north central Indiana. So I'm about an hour north of Indianapolis. Born and raised in a small town.
Yeah.
Rossville, it's about 1,500 people. And I'm not far from my parents or my in-laws. We're just right down the road. And
Your roots run deep there.
They do. So good place to be.
Awesome. All right. Well, are you a farm boy? We're talking about the hometown stuff. Did you grow up in the country, or is this
My dad was not a farmer. He was not a hunter. He has a job at Purdue in the animal science department.
Okay.
And I did not grow up in a hunting family. It's just something that I picked up. Actually, when I was 12 years old, I asked for a trail camera for Christmas. And set that trail camera up that day on some property from friends from church. And the very next day, I ran back out there to check that trail camera, and there was two little bucks sparring in front of that camera. And a fire was lit for whitetails that just burns hotter and hotter. So
Yeah.
That's how kind of the journey into whitetails.
Yeah, that's cool. So let's tell our audience what Wes does day to day here. And I mentioned that you are into habitat consulting, big time whitetail management. I want to hear all about how you got into that and what you're doing day to day and stuff. But just what is your job title, and what would you tell people? This is what I do for a living.
Yeah, I get the blessing to go around to people's properties and help them maximize their property's whitetail potential for a company called Higgins Outdoors. And if that company doesn't sound familiar, there's a gentleman by the name of Don Higgins that has a popular podcast called the Chasing Giants podcast.
Yep.
That I was blessed for him to take me underneath his wing many years ago. And Don's top 5 bucks averaged 204 inches. And in my personal opinion, he's the best deer hunter in the country and the best whitetail land manager. And
there are not very many people out there that can claim that, are there?
No, there are few and far between. So
Yeah.
the thing that I love about Don is you can type in your favorite celebrity into YouTube and it'll say so-and-so shot buck at 62 yards or whatever the case is. And the thing about Don is you type his name into YouTube and it says 221-inch buck killed at 7 yards. And the reason I love that is because Don's never been a guy that has used equipment to make him more successful. I mean, you're never going to see Don with a crossbow, and he's done everything in his power to become a better woodsman in the way that he manages his property to be more successful rather than furthering his distance or his equipment through technology.
Right on.
Such.
Okay. Yeah. So all about positioning yourself and really putting yourself right in the face of the animal and
managing a property to make a deer come in to within 25 yards.
All right. So let's rewind a little bit. Tell me how you first started this relationship with Don. Where'd you meet him?
When I was 17 years old, there was a guy in our community that had a captive deer farm. And I started working for that deer farmer and bought some of my own captive deer from him. Started writing articles for various outdoor magazines. And then I went to Purdue in wildlife management. And when I was at Purdue, met a girl who's now my wife. We've been together for 13 years. And my future mother-in-law bought me Don's books for Christmas one year.
Okay.
And she said, I think I kind of know this guy. And it was my mother-in-law and Don have like the same, like their grandpas or cousins or something like that.
Okay.
So they're kind of related.
2 or 3 degrees removed. It's
exactly.
close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so after she bought me his books for Christmas, she arranged for our two families to meet at a steakhouse, and that was my Christmas present. And so between the captive deer farming and the outdoor riding and my degree in wildlife management, we just had a lot in common away to talk about. And so, that's been probably 13, 14 years ago now. So
wow. I didn't realize you guys had that much history together, that you went that far back. That's cool.
Yep.
After that point, at some point, he must have seen something in you as this young 17-year-old kid. He must have thought, like, I like this kid. I got, you said you had a lot in common.
Yeah.
Well, clearly Don has kind of taken you under his wing over the last 10, 13, 12, whatever years, and mentored you up, brought you in then later as a business partner, and really, not just invested in you, but allowed you to invest in the company and take on the role of general manager at one point in the business, right? I'm stealing your story here, but
no,
so where to go from there?
Yeah. It really is a God story, and got to give credit where credit is due.
Amen.
It was a God-given opportunity on how those doors opened. And Real World was growing and had a sales position, for a salesman to sell seed. And I applied for the job and did not get the job. Someone else got the Real World sales job.
Okay.
And I was down in the dumps, and I was like, man, that was the perfect job for me. I just knew that I would have done a good job as a Real World salesman.
Yeah.
And it's funny how God opens doors, though. It was a few months later that I got a call from, at the time Don was one of the owners of Real World, and then there was another owner, and he called me and he said, "Hey, Wes, would you be interested in buying into Real World?" And so over the course of a few months, I went from down in the dumps, from not getting the sales position, to I end up buying into Real World and became the general manager, and I end up becoming that salesman's boss. So it's just interesting how different doors were opened. And,
for sure. Yeah. God's greater plan, man. Absolutely. When sometimes you just get out of your own way and follow his path, he's going to,
absolutely.
Yeah. Big opportunities come, which is amazing. So really cool. And that's how I first met you, I think, was when you're in that role and you're kind of expanding your footprint, and, was happy to do business with you guys through Real World and awesome products.
Have you ever, before I get away from that getting into the Real World conversation, is anyone that steps into owning a business for the first time, or business ownership, there's always a degree of risk. There's always a lot of,
if there's no risk, there's no reward.
Exactly. And there's a pastor out of Washington, D.C. named Mark Batterson that he wrote a book called If. And I read that book during that time frame, and that book really changed my life. And there's a phrase in there that he says, faith is spelled R-I-S-K. And that really just resonated with Madison and I, in that you trust God most when you're taking a risk. And
you have to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that was our story, was buying into that business was a huge financial risk for us. And that's your faith grows leaps and bounds when that happens, though.
Awesome. I appreciate you sharing that part of it. That's really, really cool. So, all right. So you went from being daytime operations manager and helping kind of grow the company and networking with guys like me, and just really expanding sales and doing all that sort of stuff. And you've transitioned. So what's your day-to-day now like? And that's with Higgins Outdoors. You're doing Whitetail Consulting.
Yep.
Tell us what that is.
Yeah, so the Chasing Giants podcast that Don and Terry operate is really just blessed both the Real World Wildlife Products and Higgins Outdoors. So Real World Wildlife Products sells the feed, seed, mineral, and then Higgins Outdoors does land consulting. And I used to work full-time basically for both. This is when I was the general manager at Real World, and then consulting full-time as well. And it just really got to the point, Chase, where I was just pulling my hair out and was just trying to do too much at one time and needed to make some decisions on what can I cut back on, what direction do I want to go more.
Need focus.
Exactly. I had to keep some sanity. And at that time we're thinking about starting to have a family, and I knew I needed to make some decisions on what I wanted to spend more time doing. And so, I've been consulting now for 6 years, and for the past 4 years, that's been strictly just as Real World and Higgins Outdoors grew, I decided, hey, I'm no longer going to be the general manager, and started doing just the Higgins Outdoors consulting stuff.
Yeah,
so,
right on. So let's walk through what a hunting consultant or whitetail consultant does. Like, I'm interested in improving my hunting.
Yep.
You know, I bought a great piece of hunting property. It's not doing what I want it to do. It's just, you know, where are the low holes in my bucket? I don't even know where to begin. Right. Yeah. So I reach out. Yep. You know, I've seen or listened to the podcast, or I've seen your guys' content. I'm familiar with the food plot seed, whatever. And I feel like, you know, these are people I know, like, and trust, and they can help me. Right. Yeah. So when somebody calls you, what's the first step? Where do you start with them, and where does it go from there?
Yeah. The first thing that I do is I ask them to send me an aerial. They email me over an aerial, and then I send them a list of questions, and there's 12 questions on there. And what I'm doing is I want to look at their aerial layout, and then that list of questions has it. Like I said, there's many questions on there, but right at the top of the list is, what are your goals for your property? And what I want to do is look at that aerial and then compare it with what they say their goal is, and see if I feel like if the two can marry. Meaning, if a guy in Pennsylvania with a 30-acre property that's completely surrounded by timber and has one point of access tells me he wants to kill a booner every year, I know I'm setting myself up for failure, right? And his goals aren't realistic.
Right.
So I want to look at somebody's aerial, look at their survey questions, and make sure that it's a good fit for both of us.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
And then, so let's assume it is, you move forward, you schedule the site visit and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
What happens when you get to somebody's property? What do you do first? What are you looking for? All that kind of stuff. Walk me through it.
Yeah. The day of the visit, the first thing I do is I go through a PowerPoint presentation with them. Because to me, it's very important that I'm not just handing somebody a plan and say, hey, do this, as I want them to understand why we're doing what we're doing. And if they understand why, then they can implement the plan better. So to me,
they'll stick to it. They won't commit, right?
It's about an education.
Okay.
It's about educating them to a different way of thinking about property. And, if you can educate someone to a different way of thinking about their property, then they're going to implement the plan more successfully. So
Gotcha.
I start off the day going through that PowerPoint presentation to try and change their thinking. Because I would say that the way that we approach properties is maybe a little radical. And then,
how so?
How so?
Yeah.
I won't put a plan together for someone with a hunting lease. Our plans are strictly for landowners.
Gotcha.
The reason why is because the things that we are going to do to the property, only a landowner can make those changes. And what I want to do is select the most conservative locations based on access and wind, and manipulate the deer traffic past those locations.
Right.
So it's a totally different thought process than a public land or a lease. If it's a lease, you've got to chase the deer. You've got to go to where the deer sign is at.
Right.
But the unique thing that a landowner has is that they don't have to chase deer. Is they can select the most conservative locations based on access and wind and get the deer to go past those places. And it's just a different thought process than
100% see that.
I have to go to where the deer are. Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. That's really cool. So, what would you say are the 3 most common goals that your clients have? Like, of all these people that reach out to you and you say you want to know what their goals are, people are calling you for what are the top, let's say, 3 reasons?
That obviously to kill more deer or at least bigger bucks. And the thing that I like about a lot of the clients that we work with is their goals are not always just for themselves. It's a lot of times it's, I want to introduce my kids to hunting,
Family, friends.
exactly. And I appreciate that a lot of times.
Yeah.
When we get a client, Austin Razor comes to mind just off the top of my head, is Higgins Outdoors client that he wanted to set up his property for helping take, he just this past year took a disabled child hunting. And
Wow.
that's a privilege to put a plan together for somebody that
Yeah.
their goal is not just to put it so they can kill 200-inch
Right,
deer,
man.
but so that they can help others.
That's very cool that you
that's
get to be
convicting. Yeah.
right, and you get to be a part of that.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Did you ever think, as you were going through studying wildlife biology at Purdue, that you would someday be involved with helping set up a property so that a disabled kid could enjoy it? Like,
it was a dream.
Yeah? That's
I
amazing.
I dreamed of that, and
I think that's really cool. I'm sorry, I didn't want to dwell on that, but also that's such a cool thing. I wouldn't want to just skip right past it. Like,
yeah,
I have helped a lot of people set up hunting properties, and I don't have the brand that you guys do, but I've done a lot of habitat consulting work in the last
absolutely
8 or 10 years or whatever. And there are certain cases like that where it's just like, it's really gratifying, very fulfilling when you're getting texts a year later, 3 years later, 5 years later from the people that you did work for.
Right.
And they're texting you, the harvest photos and stuff with their young kids, and the kids that were like toddlers when I was there, and now kid's 12 and he's shooting bucks, and
that's special.
It is. It's awesome.
Yeah,
it's so cool to see
rewarding.
that you put kind of your thumbprint on a piece of property, and then later on you get to see that, like, what that mark became.
To get a text and say he came past the tree just like you, like you laid out, and
it's almost like you were there.
Right. It was like, man, it's really gratifying to put a plan together on paper, and then years later it gets implemented. And particularly when you have a case when it's a kid or a veteran or something like that, it's special.
Or somebody, even just somebody's like personal best, like their their biggest deer ever and whatever.
Absolutely.
That's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about hunting properties. We've kind of, I think, at this point established that your stuff, and that you've been in the presence of a mastermind trophy deer killer for long enough to absorb, at least through osmosis, some nuggets here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about hunting property productivity. So let's just say, what would you say are like some of the key factors that make a property really promising or have high potential?
Yeah. To me, there's two questions that I ask myself when I ask, how high is the property ceiling? And how high a property ceiling is determined by, number one, can I access the property from multiple different directions? And number two, how much of the property line is likely to get neighboring hunting pressure? And if I can answer those two questions well, Chase, the rest is going to fall into play. And what I mean by that is, let's say you've got an 80-acre bean field surrounded by more agriculture, more bean fields.
Mm-hmm.
And another guy's got an 80-acre chunk of timber surrounded by more timber.
Yeah.
Well, give me the 80-acre bean field, and within 5 years, I'm confident that I can be killing more big deer there than the timber track. And so the way that I look at properties is not for the quality of the cover that's there today, but can I access it from multiple different directions, and how much of the property line is likely to get neighboring hunting pressure? Because if you can answer those two questions well, the ceiling is high.
Gotcha. Very cool. So do you have any like specific examples of a hunting property that maybe went from like underperforming or low productivity to, you made them a plan, they implemented things, and it really like surpassed their expectations?
Well, one property I'm really proud of, or one that I like to share the story on, is I probably shouldn't say last names or counties or anything like that. But
keep it some anonymity, but tell us the story of it.
Yep. But there's a property in southern Michigan, and southern Michigan is kind of known to be intense hunting pressure.
Yeah, people are stacked on top of each other the way they talk about it, right?
Yeah, yep. It's tough to kill big deer in southern Michigan. We'll just
Mhm.
put it that way. And I've got a client there that a few years ago killed a 212-inch buck in southern Michigan, and continually year after year, they're chasing giants. And to me, I'm just so happy for them as they have a property that has the power of isolation, that very little amount of the property line, it's very difficult to hunt along their property lines. It's very little connecting cover, and they can access it from multiple different directions. So it has those two things that we look for. And even in southern Michigan, with the right property layout, they're chasing big ones every year. So that's pretty exciting to me.
What size of property are we talking about, roughly?
150 acres.
Wow.
Yep.
That's really cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, it might be 120, it might be 160, but
yeah, ballpark.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Okay, so what would you say are some of like the most common mistakes? And I'm hearing access already, but what are the most common mistakes that people are making when they're trying to hunt their property better, or, you know, hunting mature deer in general?
I would say more food in more places is a very common mistake. And I like to see more food in less places, because it's so often where I go to 120, 160, 200 acre property, and they've got all these McDonald's. They've got all these half acre size food plots that are spread out across the property.
Mhm.
And a deer goes, eats over here, and then he goes, eats and over there. And to me, you and I don't eat at McDonald's because we love it. We eat at McDonald's because it's convenient.
Mm-hmm.
And when you have all these quarter and half acre size food plots, there's very low predictability on where a deer is going to go to feed.
Yeah.
Is he's going to eat there because it's convenient. He stepped out of his bed and he's going to eat there, but he's not going to eat there regularly or with consistency a lot of times. It's just if it's convenient.
Right. You're checking your trail cameras and it's like the deer is bouncing around like a pinball.
Exactly. So if you've got a property with 10, 12, quarter acre, half acre size food plots, very low deer predictability as far as where he's going to go when he steps out of his bed. But if you've got a steakhouse, if you've got I'll call it the Covington Beef House. That's where we like to go to eat. It's an hour out of our way. And when we go to the Covington Beef House, that's got a lot of pulling power. There's a lot of people coming there from a long ways away. And if you've got 5, 7, 10 acres of grains, greens, and legumes to nutritionally provide all that a deer needs, that's a Covington Beef House. That's a place with some pulling power.
Okay.
So I want to provide more acres of food in less places, so that way I know when a deer stands up out of his bed, he's going to the beef house.
So let's say Midwestern state, let's use Iowa, Indiana, Illinois, typical Midwestern blend of ag and timber.
Yep.
And in a scenario like that, what would you say is like a good size food plot to really, you're talking about, let's maybe get away from having many micro food sources and identifying great locations for a handful of bigger food sources. How big of food plots are we talking about in an ideal scenario?
Yeah. Deer density has a lot to do with that. Is if you're in an area where, I mean, in my area, my county is 94% agriculture, and I can plant a half acre soybean plot, and when the season starts, that entire half acre is there. That's how much agriculture is in my area. And that's not the case for a lot of guys. Is you get into parts of Missouri where you plant a half acre and it'll last a week.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You better have a double hot wire around that bad boy.
So deer density is a big part of the answer to that question, Chase. But to give a ballpark is my farm, I've got 200 acres and there's 12 acres of food. And that 12 acres is split up between grains, greens, and legumes. So
gotcha. That's awesome. Okay. Well, we're going to get back to that because I want to hear all about your personal farm too. But let's stick for a minute on just habitat management, helping these clients lay out their ideal property. And we have talked many times in past episodes about starter farms, you know, where people become a landowner. The dream is realized. They put their name in the plat. But maybe it isn't as big a tract as they'd really like, or maybe it just doesn't, it's not perfect, right? But they can do things to make it better, and they kind of cut their teeth and learn, and they share experiences with their kids and stuff while they're still young enough to they get the opportunity. So we don't ever want to discourage about like, well, hold out and don't buy land until you can afford the dream farm, whatever, because that can be pretty almost out of, I don't want to say out of grasp, but it's a lofty goal for most of us, right? So we do have a lot of back episodes and conversations that kind of focus on the starter farm, getting somebody into their first piece of ground. And you can do things to hunt better and hunt wiser and be more successful on killing more mature deer or, relative to what's in your area or whatever on smaller parcels. But to really up your game and to manage and implement these plans, most of the time you're probably already at a point where you're like, I'm ready to get real serious about this. I assume generally those are a little bit bigger tracts. They're probably not 20s and 40s much.
Right.
What would you say your average size consult client?
Well, in the past couple of years, I would say the average would be around 160 to 200 acres.
Okay.
But I've put plans together for 7-acre parcels and up to 3,000 acres.
Okay.
So, I mean, from 7 acres to 3,000.
Same. You got me beat at 7 acres. I have done a consult for a guy that had a couple probably 15-acre parcels, and it's kind of fun. I mean, but we have a lot of pre-conversation about the like, okay, we got to have really. I want you to understand what the expectation is going into that.
Absolutely.
But they're like, I know it, but this is what I have. I want it to be the best 7 acres or the best 15 or whatever it can be. It takes me back to like my QDMA days where I first met the guy who, some of our audience will have no idea who these people are. It's a small circle, right? So I'm going to refer to Dr. Grant Woods.
Okay.
So Grant, in one of the first seminars I ever saw him talk at, or a workshop, I think we had him come to do a field day, a talk, and tour this property and talk about how it's laid out and stuff. And it was actually a farm that he had originally done the consult and the plan on. So, he had history there. He was really familiar with how they laid it out. And he pointed out all the areas that they weren't doing some of the things that he told them they should be, whatever. But he said, here's the fact of the matter. And this is his position, his opinion on it. So I'm glad to get yours in response. He said, you don't have to have the best habitat in the world. You don't even have to have the best habitat in the neighborhood. You just have to be this much better than all of your neighbors.
Yeah.
And he's really just talking about the deer. The reality of the situation is that deer don't have any idea what the best habitat in the world looks like because they spend pretty much their entire life in maybe a 2, 3, 4 square mile area.
Sure. Yeah.
So, his point is valid, I think, to that extent. And it's like, would you all strive to have like magazine cover quality food plot? Would you love to have, the healthiest stand of timber that ever existed in the Midwest? Yeah, that'd be awesome. But, the reality is none of us we don't live in a bubble. We don't have unlimited time and resources and whatever to create that level of, precision. And the truth is, it's really not necessary. You just have to do the best, as Eric would say, Eric Long.
That's a Teddy Roosevelt quote.
Yes, you're right. Thank you for pointing that out. We're gonna take Eric down just one little notch here by pointing in. Yes, he gives proper quote credit, but Eric is the one I hear repeated over and over again. That you do what you can, what you have, where you are, and it's true. So anyway, getting back to this, let's say, what role does habitat quality play in the overall productivity of a hunting property? I mean, there's genetics, there's age, there's whatever, we can say, well, if you want to kill a certain caliber of deer, but let's just say you're in a particular neighborhood. How good does the quality of habitat have to be before it trumps some of the other factors?
Yeah. Well, I think you really alluded to it when you were talking about the neighbors just a minute ago. And I like to use the word differentiate, and I want to differentiate my property from the neighbors. And this couldn't be any more true, particularly when you live in a cover-rich environment, is if you do have the 80-acre chunk of timber surrounded by more timber, is why should they be on your 80 as opposed to everything that's around you? And if that's your situation, or if you're in open farm country, or no matter where you're at, we want to differentiate our property from the neighbors.
Right.
And like you were just alluded to, is you just got to be a little bit better than the neighbors. And I want my clients to have a laundry list of reasons as to, when I ask you, why is your property different from the neighbors? They should just, boom, be able to rattle them right down the list as, oh, I've got 5 acres of alfalfa. Nobody has alfalfa. I did 10% improvement, and just right on down the list of reasons why their property's different. So that's my goal.
Yeah. And I do the same thing. I kind of start, like you had said, study an aerial first. You're looking 20, 25,000 feet elevation, and you're scanning not just the property you're going to go do the consult on, but you're looking what the area offers.
Right.
And more importantly, what doesn't it offer that deer need?
What's the limiting factor?
Right.
Yeah.
So when you go on that property for the first time, you're identifying like where are the low holes in the bucket for the deer herd. And I'm not just talking about that particular property, but what are they lacking in this area that you could provide that they don't have elsewhere, and things like that. That I want to, there's a concept, and maybe, this is maybe not revolutionary. Somebody else probably realized this or saw this way before I was ever in the game. But I don't think I ever heard somebody say this. It was just something that I saw happening, and then I really started to focus on it and ask other people about it. And so I'm curious if you've ever seen this happen, because we know that like your yearling bucks disperse from the mother doe. She's ready to breed again, so she runs them off, right?
Yep.
And so he's got to vacate, and he might move a mile, he might move 3, 4, 5, 6 miles or whatever, but he's going to go. Genetic drift does its thing, nature running its course, and he's got to go seek out and find new territory.
Yep.
Find a hole somewhere where the social pressure isn't so hot that they won't let him find a home, right? So when you have better habitat than all of your surrounding area, and this young buck crosses through, and you maybe catch this unique looking deer on trail camera, that's whether he's a little spike on one side and a 3 on the other, or maybe I've got a couple that I've seen in past years that were a double throat patch. It's not a big racked buck, he's a yearling, but there's something identifiable about him that you could recognize him again later. And then, but you only saw him maybe once or twice or 3 times in that whole season. And then the next year you see him half a dozen times as a 2-year-old. And then as a 3, 4, 5, etc. You know where I'm going with this. By the time that deer becomes a mature deer, he is on you, like living on your farm, and you get him there every single day. And the first time I like saw that, because I keep all the antlered photos, video, whatever on our farm and hard drives. And so like if you see a deer that is now a hit list mature buck that you're really after, it's fun to go back and see how many years worth of, I know you do this too, right? To see how many years worth of history you might actually have. And sometimes you'll surprise yourself and be like, that's him. And that's him as like a 2-year-old. That's him as a 1-year, And when that happens, I recognize that as being like clear evidence that he passed through. But there were already mature deer here, and the social pressure was high enough that like there were dominant bucks that are like, you keep moving, get out, and so he had to keep roaming and found some hole in the wall, poor quality farm probably, or, lower quality habitat or not great cover, whatever, and survived for a couple of years until he became more dominant and claimed. But he basically passed through and saw, this is like amazing. I want to live here. Someday I'm going to live here. And eventually when he was at a spot that he could claim that, it became his home. You ever seen that?
Very interesting that you just asked me that question. I wrote an article for, Don is the editor of a magazine called Whitetail Life. And, have really enjoyed writing for that magazine. And I wrote an article, in Whitetail Life called the Late Season Litmus Test. And it kind of very similar to what you're discussing right now is I call late season the litmus test as how you're doing for a habitat manager, because on my properties, I live in open farm country, and I really don't see a lot of those new strange bucks in the rut. Is the bucks that I see in the rut, I know those bucks. When I see strange bucks that I haven't seen before, a lot of times it's in late season or even after season. It's in December, January, February, March. And I call late season the litmus test on how we're doing as habitat managers, because you should be sucking into your deer into your property all season long, by the way that you're managing the cover, the food, and limiting the amount of hunting pressure.
Yeah.
And when we're seeing those strange bucks or bucks that come up onto our properties in late season, a lot of times it might just be a handful of pictures. And then the next year, okay, now all of a sudden they're there a little bit more. And then the next year, okay, now this is his core. And the buck that I shot on my home farm this year, he's kind of the perfect example of that story. I called that buck U-Haul. And the year that we moved into that property, he went through my property 3 different times. That was it. On trail cameras, he went through that property just 3 times. Going into the next season, we had the property logged. I added 17 acres of switchgrass, over 10 acres of tree plantings. But the biggest thing that I did was I stayed out of the majority of it. I just had a sanctuary. And Chase, the next year, you're going to have a hard time believing this because he just went through 3 times the first year. But the next year, I got 876 pictures of that deer. And it was just, I couldn't believe it. It was just mind-blowing to me that a deer that just went through my property 3 times, all of a sudden, boom, he's here.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I have seen that.
We had a buck that this is Chase's sob story. I'm almost a big deer killer. I have so many stories of like, I'm at full draw, it's about to happen, and then it didn't happen. And like, I don't want to dwell on that. It could bring me to tears, but it happens over and over again.
Back.
Oh my gosh. It's so like, I have, especially in one location on our farm, I've had multiple like close encounters with big deer where you go to full draw and it's so close to happening and it just didn't happen. But it's still one of my favorite tree stands, my favorite spots to sit. There's a buck there a couple of years ago that we named Wreck-It Ralph. And we had found and just because he shredded so many trees in his core area and just was, he was just a wrecking ball everywhere he went. And so he was really unique deer, very easily to identify. And he was like such a homebody, had him on camera daily, multiple, points of the farm and stuff. And he was like, his core area had shrunk to this 20-acre patch of woods right behind my kids' playhouse. Yeah. Like in the valley, right in the bowl behind our house. Yeah. And always coming and going out of that side every evening and stuff. And, the day that he was killed, it wasn't the day he was killed. Like I shed some tears that day. He fell during gun season to a neighbor and, we share cameras, pictures back and forth and stuff. And so I was happy for him, even though I was devastated. Yep. And so the guy that killed him, shoots me a text. Hey, I got Wreck-It Ralph. They adopted the name that we were calling him over here because they knew him by that too. And so anyway, it was about 3 or 4 days after that, this young buck showed up that I had like 1 or 2 videos of the year before. Hadn't seen him at all this season, and he just moves in. Yeah. And that became like his new hangout. And he went from like hardly ever seeing this deer to he was there all the time. And there was a vacancy and he just like moved in and took it. And that's that deer over there on the wall above the bathroom door. But really, really cool buck. And the following year, he turned into just a absolute stud. Yeah, and
gorgeous deer.
It's just cool to see when you manipulate habitat and when it really starts to work, it isn't just that it worked on one deer. Right. It's when that deer is gone, another one will just jump at the chance to move in, right? And that's the trap you're trying to lay.
Exactly. Yep.
It's cool. All right, so you touched a little bit on your personal farm. You're a young guy. Do you want to tell everybody how old you are?
33.
You are too dang young to be as successful as you are. And the land ownership, I mean, I'm a little jealous. You got 200 acres, you just said, right?
It's 212. Yep.
Oh, it's 212, Chase. So tell us about your farm, man. And tell us more importantly, like the land journey, where did that dream begin? You can give us the abbreviated version if you want. We could be here an hour or two, I'm sure, but tell us like when did you start dreaming about that? How did you make it a reality?
Yeah. Been dreaming that since Griffin's age. I mean, 12, 13 years old, you're dreaming about
since you had those property. 2 bucks fighting on a trail cam.
Exactly. Yep. Ever since then. And, I mean, I was the kind of guy that, I'd be mowing yards or baling hay for money or whatever the case may be. And
Yeah.
some people are going and spend that right away. As I was a 13-year-old that was, nope, it's going in the land fund. I mean, like literally at 13 years old, it was, I'm saving money for land at 13 years old.
That's awesome.
And that was my goal for a long time. And when I had the opportunity to buy into real world is the month prior, I had made an offer on 43 acres and it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then I bought into a company, bought into real world, and all that money went away. And so that dream got put on hold. And it was, hey, I was going to do everything that I could to afford 43 acres and be in debt for a long time. And then end up buying into a company, and praise the Lord that company, we were able to take some money from that company as the years went by, and never would have been able to. Just 212 acres is beyond my wildest dreams. It's, didn't come from a wealthy family, didn't come from a family that had land, as my parents live in a subdivision on a half acre. So to have the opportunity at 30 years old to buy that farm was, it gives me chills thinking about it right now.
Yeah. Well, I remember the first time I caught wind of that. I think you made a post on Facebook about, and I don't know how long you had owned it at that point or whatever. That was the first time you kind of shared that news.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Oh, dude, I was lit up all afternoon about it. Yeah. I was like, I just wanted to tell you that. And I don't think I ever did that. Like, I was celebrating that with you.
Thank you.
I was like, that's awesome.
It is. It's such a big deal. And for, you understand like how big of a deal it was to me.
Cause I mean, it was a dream. It took a lot of grind,
grit, sacrifice, risk,
right, and faith.
And faith. Absolutely. Amen.
That's awesome.
It just.
So tell us about the farm.
The farm it has those two, the two questions that I said earlier is how much of the property line is likely to get neighboring hunting pressure, and can you access it from multiple different directions? That's what I was looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And the property that we bought is not a good whitetail farm. Is the quality of the cover was very poor. There was probably less than 5 deer utilizing the property when we bought the farm. It was open timber, not just, there was very little quality cover and just a pass through. And, but I think a lot of guys are looking for sign when they're going to look at hunting properties. They're looking at, are the big deer here?
Yeah.
And I wasn't looking for, are the big deer here? I was looking for those two things. Does it have the potential to be a long?
How high is the ceiling?
Because everybody has different goals when they buy properties. Are you trying to buy a property to make money and flip it and kill a deer or two, get some trail camera pictures and pass it on to the next guy? Or my goal is to raise a family, have some calves, be there for the rest of my life. And so it's a different thought process than a guy that's going to flip a farm.
Sure.
And so I wasn't worried about, hey, there's just a few deer here. I can build it. And I can add the switchgrass and the tree plantings and do a timber harvest. And in a few short years, man, it has responded. So that's been exciting.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that is a great point, because there are so many people that think that, it would take 10 years or more to transform a farm into something like that. And it really doesn't. Like, nature will respond pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Especially
2-3 years. Yeah. You can change it in a big way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, so does your wife hunt, or is she? No. Okay. So right now you kind of got the woods to yourself, but you mentioned, starting on a family and that sort of thing. You got 2 boys just like us. So, what's your goal, your hope, your aspirations, I guess, for them as far as land ownership goes? I mean, what do you, are you a guy who, it's like, they'll have their own path. I hope they follow it wherever it takes them. Or you like, land ownership is one of the most amazing privileges ever, and I'm going to do everything in my power to kind of help them on their path to get there? Or like, what's your take on it?
My goal is that they have a respect for creation, is that they have they steward the land. And I'm not a killer. I believe that they need to. I'm not somebody that wants to get my kids into hunting just right away. I grew up. I told you I got the trail camera first, and then my next step was getting into trapping, and then I believe that trapping fosters a woodsmanship in kids that hunting does not. And I see so often where dads are running the cell cameras and the food plots and the blinds, and they go put Johnny in the blind behind the crossbow, and he shoots the deer and doesn't know what to think about it.
I'm so torn about that, because they want to make it easy for them so that they don't get burnt out, so the kid doesn't get bored with it or whatever. They want them to get an immediate taste of success so that they stick with it. I hear that all the time. Yeah. And on the other hand, like, I think back like to my youth, and I got bit by the bug at some point, and it stuck, but nobody handed me any big deer on a food plot from a heated blind. Like you had to want it, you know, so I think, I hate to beat up on the guys that do it that way, but I'm more on your side of the fence. And I guess I would say, like, our kids, we have photos and stuff of them running a trap line with me when they were just big enough to, they couldn't even, you know, they couldn't even drag the coon by themselves to take it back over the Ranger. And it was just, I don't, you know, I think they'll appreciate and remember those things a lot more. And I think they understand how wildlife use a property. To manage a resource responsibly, you really have to understand it. And I think if your experience with nature is like, you show up before dark and you climb into a heated blind and overlook a food plot and you pick one out and shoot it. I don't think you really probably appreciate it as much as you would if you had, you know, the kind of reverence and respect for it, in the sense of like, I understand the full ecosystem here, not just the one animal that I'm hunting today. And I know what role they all play. And I like, it's big picture stuff. And I think you're doing it the right way.
Well, I've got two, Ben Boone and William Crockett. So I got the Boone and the Crockett.
How can you not love that?
And my 2-year-old, right now we've got baby chicks in the garage, that he can go check on the baby chicks and the temperature and make sure they got food and water. And so they're doing that right now. We've had chickens in the past.
Some livestock husbandry.
And
you're raising them right, young man.
And then in the summer, we got a creek right behind the house. I can't wait. He'll be old enough this summer that I know this is maybe a little weird for some people, but we eat crawdads out of our creek. And so I can't wait to take him out there and catch crawdads, and we'll have a crawdad dinner. And so just stuff like that. Those are the kind of things where I want that to be his introduction into nature. And I will never ask him to go deer hunting. Is like, to me, it's, and like, to each their own, absolutely. But that's going to have to be,
if they want to do it, they'll do the asking.
Right.
They'll chase you.
Yeah.
Dad, take me to the woods.
Right.
Can I go today?
Right.
Yeah. That's cool. All right. So thanks for sharing a little bit of your land story. It isn't cool. It's more than cool. It's inspiring. It's the, you know, young person had the dream, started early. We've had a whole episode about this with Willie Irish not very long ago, just talking about start as early as you can possibly start.
Yeah.
You know, feed that dream.
I hope a 13-year-old is listening to this right now. And like, you can do it. You can do it. Like, just start now.
Yeah. And that's awesome, because like our latest reel that we just put out was like, is land too expensive for young people these days? And it's because we hear that all the time, you know, and it's a reoccurring question. It's a theme. Like, people are just like, it's just out of grasp. It's too high. It's too expensive. It's outrageous. And the prices have gone up significantly. It happened in the early 90s. It happened in the mid 2000s. It's happening now in the mid 2020s. And that's not a new, it's cyclic, but it'll go through a rapid appreciation period, and then it levels off or maybe dips a bit. And then land is always a great long-term investment, but the earlier you start preparing for it and building the dream and figuring out exactly what you want and being willing to work and commit. This goes back to this kind of a Dave Ramsey thing. Like, the more you commit to a goal, the faster you will get there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the whole reason behind the whole snowball concept, right? So the more you feed that fire, the faster you will figure out how to get there.
Right.
Like your income will climb. You will become more successful in other ways in life just because of your determination to make something happen. Have a big goal like that.
Right.
You'll get there, and you'll probably get there a lot faster than you thought you could.
Well, for me, I was looking for a specific kind of layout in a particular area. And I knew that there was only a certain amount of properties in the area that we wanted to be that would ever be of interest to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I made a list of those properties. There's 27 of them. There's 27 different properties that I was interested in those farms. None of them were up for sale. And I definitely was not going to wait for them to come on the real estate market.
Yeah. So
I started knocking on those people's doors and started getting down the list so that the farm that we bought, it was not for sale.
Was it on the list?
It was on the list.
Okay.
Yep. And so when I got down to that point, looked up online to see where the tax address was, and it was a lady. I don't even want to say the state, but she was in a different state.
Okay.
And so I knew I couldn't knock on the door. I mean, without driving.
I was going to say
it was going to take 12 hours to get to her
really
place.
Committed.
So what I did is I Google stalked that lady. I just started Googling information.
Well, you might have scared her to death if you just showed up on her door.
Right.
Okay.
But I started just Google searching this lady that owned this property that I was interested in, and found out she was a school teacher. So I called the school, and the school she retired from the school.
Okay.
And it's a very rural community.
Yeah.
Farther out west. And they gave me her phone number. The school that she retired from gave me her phone number.
They're supposed to do that.
Right. So yeah, I'm shocked that they did. And so then I called her.
They must have sensed you were not a serial killer or whatever.
Well, the first thing
Scammer.
when I called her, she said, "Well, are you with a real estate group?" And so I gave her my whole spiel on wanting to raise a family and have a farm and improve the habitat for wildlife and such. And she said, "Well, send me a picture of you." So I sent her.
How do I know I'm not being catfished?
Right. So I sent her a picture of Madison and I, and the conversation went from there. But it was a farm that was not on the real estate market. It was like you just said, it was knowing what you're looking for and getting after it.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I feel like I should follow that up with a shameless plug about why people should use a real estate broker, but I won't.
Well, there's huge advantages to using someone like yourself.
Not everybody's so lucky to find one like that, but clearly I think it wasn't just luck. I mean, you worked really hard. You went down a list of 20 some door knockings so I admire your persistence and your willingness to commit to doing that. There are professionals that will do a lot of that kind of stuff for you. But
yep, absolutely. I didn't mean to take away from.
No offense at all. I'm impressed. That's awesome. Okay, so let's talk for a minute, shift gears a bit to some of the economic aspects of hunting land, because I think that's the second thing that we hear most commonly from people that are looking at buying a hunting property is like, oh, it's so expensive, I can't afford it. And then the next thing is like, it costs so much to own it. Costs so much to have it. You're carrying a big mortgage, or you have, there's a lot of payments. So I wanted to touch on and talk about like some of the ways that people are producing revenue on these hunting properties, these farms that you consult with, or maybe it's your own farm that you use as an example or whatever, share something that like, what are some ways that you see people generating revenue off of these farms that either are mixed parcels or are primarily recreational or hunting?
Yeah. So there's the obvious ones. There's timber opportunities. There's cash rent from ag income. If you're wanting to put habitat onto the property or convert ag ground into habitat, in Indiana, there's programs that you can enroll into native grasses. Indiana CRP 33 is a native grass program, and then there's a Indiana CRP 43 is a tree planting program. And those are both good opportunities. I've got acreage and tree plantings in 43, which is paying me $262 an acre. And so CRP is an option, something to at least consider. But what I think a lot of people don't consider, and this is a little more out of the box, is livestock. And there's, like I said, there's timber, there's ag income, there's CRP. But with my farm, is when you're setting up a property for hunting, is something to keep in mind is the property's huntability. Is can you access through areas of low deer likelihood and blow your wind back into them? And I installed a 17-acre cattle pasture on my property, and a significant amount of that acreage was not farm ground, and it wasn't good timber ground, and it wasn't, there was no income to be made off that ground. But now I put a fence around it, and now I'm making money off that ground. And livestock gave me an opportunity to improve the huntability of my property, as well as make 17 more acres of income off that property.
I like that.
So that was a little more of a unique opportunity that I think a lot of people don't think about. Even if you don't live on the property, is in my area, there's cattle guys that are scratching to find 10 and 15 and 20 acre patches.
Same here.
Particularly with beef prices at the moment.
Right. Yeah. Cattle is high, and there is opportunity there, I think, because there's a lot of people that think about, well, I wouldn't want to put livestock on my hunting property because they just diminish the quality of the habitat. They're taking something from the property. But the way that you just described it makes so much sense, that like you're in essence creating a little bit of a vacuum, or let's say a diminished area of wildlife usability to some degree, so that the rest of the property around it becomes more predictable movement, and also allows you the opportunity to move in there, get into a stand position, put your scent cone out over, let's not call it barren pasture, but an area where there's not a whole lot for a deer to eat or to hide behind.
It's pretty close to barren pasture. Is what I'm looking for, Chase, is I like areas of low deer likelihood, because I can access through them and blow my wind back into them. And I don't want all 212 acres of my property to be fantastic whitetail habitat. I think there's a lot of people that can help you grow big deer, but to juggle it with huntability and get them at 20 yards year after year, that's the trick. And that's what I want to be able to provide for people. And that's what Don does for people, is a 221-inch male that he shot a few years ago. Is that day he had COVID that day, and he walked through a 10-acre cattle pasture, got up into the tree right along the fence, blowing his wind back into that cattle pasture, and shoots that deer 7 yards away from the fence. And that's the way that we utilize our livestock pastures, is when we can work with somebody to shape their pasture, and they're willing to put their fences in places that are going to benefit their whitetail strategy. Man, that's an advantage.
That's awesome. Okay. So, let's talk, because we touched on here how important the quality of habitat is. You guys, you do consultations where primarily? Like, how big of a radius, how far across the country are you traveling?
Well, after this year, I've consulted in 26 states and 3 countries. So, primarily the Midwest.
I was telling Jackie that about what you do, and she's like, that makes me think about consulting. And she's like, how come you don't do more consulting work? You used to do, like, several years ago, I was doing more of it than I had the last couple of years.
Yeah.
And I'm like, because I don't like to travel that much.
Right. Right.
She's like, oh yeah, it is nice having you home at night.
Absolutely. Yeah. I gave my wife a big hug this morning at 5 o'clock in the morning and said, I'll see you in March. And I hate that. I mean, I hate that. I'm a family man. I love my wife. I've got a saint for a wife, and I do not like being away from my 2 kids.
Sure.
My wife sends me a video of my son making Valentine's Day cookies, and you're not going to be home for several days. That's just painful. That hurts.
Yeah.
And so, everybody wants you to look at their properties in January, February, March. That's the time to get it done. And so, got to make the money while you can. And so that's just a part of the sacrifice, is this time of year is, I'm left this morning at 5 a.m. and I'll be at home 2 weeks from now. And that's just, and we're okay with that. We understand.
Right. It's a sacrifice for sure, though. And, and again, appreciate how much of a blessing it is that we were able to catch you while you're through this part of the state.
Glad it worked.
Yeah. Awesome. Because I really am glad that we got to do this in person. It's been too long since we've seen each other, for one thing. But so you're touring these great hunting properties, or let's say prospective great hunting properties. Sure. Some of them maybe have some room for growth and improvement. But how much do people share with you? Like if it's, I assume a lot of them probably have owned the property relatively short period of time. I mean, is that a bad assumption? I think from my personal experience, it seemed like probably at least 60 to 75% of the time they've owned the property 5 years or less when they call me in. It's not, they're not having me come out and look at grandma and grandpa's farm that they grew up hunting generally. I love those. Yeah. But a lot of the time it's like, we bought this piece a year ago. We bought this piece 3 years ago and we hunted it this way or whatever. And we just figured out it isn't as good as we want it to be. And now it's time, to up the game or to raise the bar or whatever. Do people share much with you about like how much they're paying for some of these properties when they're,
Oh yeah.
Giving, okay.
Absolutely.
So where are you seeing like, you have some exposure then to what the market's doing 100%. Across the Midwest. Where would you say in your experience, the guy is most likely to find like best bang for the buck, good quality hunting? You can kill good deer in this area and not spend as much as you might in other parts of the, let's say Midwest or whatever.
What states?
Yeah. I'd love to hear.
Kentucky and Oklahoma.
Kentucky and Oklahoma.
Yep.
I would have guessed Kentucky. Oklahoma, that's a surprise to me.
Yeah, those would be the two places that I would say you could still get ground at a reasonable price and get good ground.
Yeah. Kansas has kind of blown up in the last 5 years, hasn't it?
A lot of out-of-staters there already.
Oh my gosh. Prices were probably dirt cheap 8 or 10 years ago. And it seemed like everybody I know who's somebody killing big deer is now hunting in Kansas. So. Yeah. And it's funny. It's like Pike County was 20 or 25 years ago, fantastic hunting. And then it just like the reputation went through the roof. And next thing you know, the gold rush is on and everybody's got to own a piece of dirt there. And that stuff.
Something that's kind of interesting with the consulting that we do is, I have the opportunity to write for Whitetail Life, and Don's an outdoor author. And through our writing, as we have a lot of material that gets put out to the plain communities being the Amish, Mennonite, German Baptist. And in those communities, land prices are typically higher. If
they go hard when something comes up for sale, don't they?
Well, you get into some of these Amish communities where there's a big, just think of Eastern Ohio, like Coshocton County, Holmes County. There's a lot of Amish in a couple county area. And when you're horse and buggy or paying a driver, you're only going so far to buy a recreational property.
Yeah, it's got to be pretty close.
Right. And oftentimes in those communities, the land prices are sky high. They're very high. But if you want a good prediction of what land prices are going to do 5 years down the road, I like to look at what it is in the plain communities, because it seems like it's just following that.
Is that right?
It's been, at least in Indiana, Ohio.
That's pretty cool. That's a unique observation. I'll have to start paying closer attention to that.
Well, if you don't have a lot of those communities local, maybe it wouldn't apply. But
that's really cool. All right. Well, let's do something fun. I'm going to hit you with some rapid fire questions, and you can give me as short of a response as you want to, but you just don't think on it too long. Whatever comes to mind. Yeah.
Got it.
You got it. All right. So what's one thing every hunting property must have for success?
A sanctuary.
Oh, I thought you were going to say access, but no, you're 100% agree with you on that. Like I heard access repeatedly through the rest of this conversation. I thought he's going to say access. He's going to say you got to have multiple points of access, but I am a bigger believer in the sanctuary concept myself. I think you got to have it.
Got to.
Yeah. Awesome.
100%.
All right.
That's the number one thing a big buck is looking for, is The shirt I'm wearing. I'm wearing a shirt right now for those just listening. It says "Freedom of Human Intrusion," and that's the number one thing a big buck is looking for.
That's awesome. All right. Your favorite wildlife seed and why it's a game changer for properties.
Gen 2 soybeans is Real World sells a blend of soybeans called Gen 2 soybeans. There's 3 different varieties of beans in there that mature at different times. They're higher in oil content and selected for shatter resistance. And if you've never planted Gen 2 soybeans, I beg you to plant those next to ag beans and see what happens in December and January. And man, if you have never hunted over 5 acres of Gen 2 soybeans in the late season, you are missing out. And one of my favorite times to hunt individual bucks is really early in the season and really late in the season, because really early and really late can be great for targeting specific bucks that are on a bed to food pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm telling you, in my opinion, January is the most overlooked month for killing target bucks, individual bucks on purpose. It's because you get into January when they're hitting 5 acres of Gen 2 soybeans, they can be really predictable.
Yeah.
I was supposed to give you short answers, wasn't I?
No, that was a great answer. The shatter resistance is what sold me at first on the Gen 2 soybeans. And the first year we planted, we have a 3-acre food plot right below the house. So 2nd story window, you can just stand up there and look out this big picture window of the 3-acre field. And every evening at dusk when it's cold, deer just come from half mile away and dumping out of our timber, and it's a magnet. It just pulls them all in. And we never had that before. And that late January all the way through the end of February, really, like we still had enough food there. It was still drawing deer. And there was many nights when it would get cold, we would have 50 to 70 deer in that 3-acre food plot.
That's a pile.
Yeah. It was fun.
Stacked.
I mean, it's just cool. What, you see a dozen or 15, 16, 17 different racked bucks in the food plot at a time.
Yep.
Like that's pretty cool. And that fun. Only happens the year that we have those soybeans in this plot. The rest of the time, like we rotate it, so the years like now we have cereal grains, we have a different blend in it. And it was a hot spot in late November, December, but nothing this time of year. Yep. So cool. Good answer. All right. Planting food plots versus baiting. What's the difference?
Are you a habitat manager or are you a killer? And food plotting that's a habitat manager. That's a guy and I'm not just planting food plots to get a deer in front of a tree stand for just a month of November or October or November. Is I want to provide 365-day nutrition on my property. And if you live in Kentucky or Ohio and you're putting out a corn pile and that's all you're doing, nothing against guys that are doing that, but they're just trying to kill something or take inventory of something. And at some point, everyone that owns land is going to have to decide if they really care about their deer herd or if they're just trying to kill and inventory their herd. Are you trying to improve the place or are you just trying to kill something?
Awesome. Well put. And I love how, you didn't beat up the guys that are baiting. It's in Illinois, it's not legal to do that. In Indiana, I think
after season
you can put out. Okay. So the regulations vary so much state by state by state.
Exactly.
So it becomes a very cultural thing. So when you go down south and everybody in Georgia or Louisiana or whatever, Mississippi, they, have their corn pile or they have, and it's just accepted etiquette, and here it just seems like we can become a little bit of elitists when we think like, oh, I would never hunt over a corn pile. Right.
But
well, you probably would if it were legal and everybody else in the neighborhood did it. So, get off your high horse. But the reality is I think that you hit it right on the head with it's a mindset shift that you're trying to do something more with the land and not just like, it isn't just about the hunt.
Well, I've been the other guy too. Like I said, I did not grow up in a family that hunted or owned land or anything like that. So, I mean, when I was getting into hunting, it was strictly permission ground. And I mean, I'd go to Kentucky and knock on doors. And I mean, if you could get permission to 5 acres and put out a corn pile, like I'm going to do it. So I've been there too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's one piece of advice you would give to somebody new to managing hunting land?
Piece of advice new to managing hunting land. Be careful who you're getting your advice from.
Ooh.
If you're new to managing hunting land, those people they're hungry for advice. They're hungry for education, and they're watching a lot of YouTube videos, listening to podcasts like these.
I heard it on the internet. It must be true.
Exactly. And there's a lot of garbage out there. And I say that just because you really need to look at how somebody's consistently killing their bucks and compare it to how you're doing it. And is the guy killing bucks with a muzzleloader in Kansas on feed? And if you're out in Kansas and that's the way you want to do it, follow his advice. Go that direction. But if you're hunting 10-acre parcels in suburbia, you need to follow somebody different. And so really vet the person's advice as to where they're giving you that information from, onto their experiences on why they believe what they believe.
Great point. All right. What is your favorite hunting property, personal or client success story? And I know you keep it short, but I think maybe you already answered this one.
Yep. I'm going to have to go with that Southern Michigan property.
It'd be hard to beat.
Yep. 212-inch buck in high pressure area. That's a fun story.
That is almost unbelievable, but it's really cool. Okay. All right. One more here. Miscanthus or switchgrass screens, and why?
Both.
It's supposed to be an either or.
Okay. Miscanthus.
Oh man.
Definitely.
Really?
Yep. I would say the ultimate screen is to combine giant miscanthus and switchgrass. But if you're going to make me pick, absolutely, I would go with giant miscanthus.
So you're going to argue they both have their place.
I would not plant switchgrass screen by itself.
Okay.
So no, because I would argue that I'll use switchgrass in a screen with giant miscanthus combined, but giant miscanthus is going to dominate that screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I have become a reluctant believer in miscanthus. I think I told you this the first time you were here.
Yeah.
It was a relatively new product to what you guys were carrying, what Real World was offering. Had clients asking for it, and I just was leery because I've seen and heard the story too many times, where somebody brought a new plant variety in that's non-native, shouldn't, naturally exist here. And we use it to make wildlife habitat or to do, for our purpose and I always am like reluctant because I feel like being a great steward of God's resource would mean that we're doing things the way that he would want us to do them.
Sure.
And so I always question whether or not that's an exotic or that's not a native plant or whatever. Yeah. And so I become a little bit of a purist with that,
soybeans aren't from here. Apples aren't from here.
Oh, see,
you could just go right down the list.
You can when you because we get we have like a blindness bias. We start thinking about well, yeah, but don't take my apple trees away. Right.
Absolutely.
So when you really start to think about all of those other things that we're already using in the landscape. So once enough evidence was there that okay, I've seen guys planting it for 10 years, 12 years, 15 years.
It hasn't gone anywhere.
It doesn't seem to be spreading.
Right.
I don't think it's a problem.
Right.
I guess I'm good with it.
Yep.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's say somebody wants to reach out to you, Wes. They've really enjoyed the talk here. They maybe have now picked up on you and followed you online somewhere. What's the best way for them to communicate, reach out to you?
Email.
Okay.
It'd be wes@realworldwildlifeproducts.com. Shoot me an email or an aerial of your property or any question whitetail related, and if I don't know the answer to it, I might forward it to Chase. So, and I'll do my best.
I'll answer all your questions, but if you're in a different country or more than 3 states away, I'll send you back to Wes.
No, just email would be the best way to get a hold of me.
Awesome. All right. Well, we like it that you're accessible, and we hope that people will reach out to you because I can tell our audience that I know you to be a man of integrity. You've impressed me from the first time you reached out years ago. And I think following your story, hearing your land story kind of develop into land ownership and that dream being realized, like it just, I have no reason to be proud of you because I have like just a loose friendship with you, at this point. Like you were kind of just an acquaintance and then Facebook friends and whatever, but it's like, I thought enough of you early on that to see you achieving your goals has like really made me happy. So I guess kudos again, and just keep grinding, keep doing it, man. And I hope I know you're going to do awesome things, but you're going to just raise those boys up to, they're so blessed to be in the home that they're in and to have the kind of lifestyle that they're going to get on your family farm there.
Well, I appreciate those kind words, Chase, and the feeling certainly mutual. Is you probably don't realize how long I Facebook stalked you. I'm
starting to get the picture. You like creeped that lady for how long before?
Yeah. Well, no. Before I was involved with Real World, is I followed your content and just really just enjoyed watching what you were doing as far as with your companies and doing habitat work. And then I got the chance to meet you and meet your boys and see how well behaved your boys are, and the respect, and they look you in the eye and shake your hand and say yes sir, and just the way that your boys act. And that says a lot about the way that you and your wife are raising your kids. And just from the first 5 minutes of being here, the first time that I got here, is I had a lot of respect just immediately for the way that you conduct yourself. And I have nothing but respect, and it's been really fun just to follow along just through social media, seeing what you're doing. And I look at you as somebody that's, man, I want to be like that someday.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, you went too far there, sir. Well, anyway, I appreciate you coming very much, Wes. It was a pleasure. I'm glad it worked out. I hope next time you're cruising through the area, don't be a stranger. If you got a long way still to make it back home and you need a pit stop, stay over sometime. We'd enjoy having you. So yeah. I appreciate everybody following this whole episode. Hope you're going to get a lot out of it, and stay tuned because the next couple of guests coming in are going to have a lot of additional knowledge for you. If you are early in your land ownership journey, we hope you'd go back and listen to or watch some of our previous episodes. If this is your first time with Land Your Ground, we hope you will join the tribe, like and subscribe, follow us on YouTube and all of the socials at Land Your Ground. We will catch you next time here on Land Your Ground.